The Supreme Court will be deciding the fate of Roe versus Wade early this summer. And there's a lot that will happen depending on this case. Now, it might not be that it's a direct reversal. Roe versus Wade is no longer the law of the land, but it could be that the basic principles of Roe versus Wade that allow for very little restrictions on abortion, that the idea of Roe versus Wade is gutted. So what happens next, of course, in this fight for life? Well, we know the abortion industry is going to ramp up two ways. They want to shut down pro-life speech.
We've been doing this for 4 decades, and yet even with wins at the Supreme Court on this very kind of issue, we are still finding ourselves defending those that want to speak out for life in the vicinity of an abortion clinic. But give us the details of this case. What was it involving, Frank?
You're so right. What's happening here is we have a unanimous Supreme Court decision in 2014, McCullen versus Coakley, that the lower courts and municipalities still haven't figured out that the court meant what it said. We represent a woman named Gerald Turco, who's been sidewalk counseling outside of an abortion clinic in Englewood, New Jersey since 2005. For the first 8 years, things were fairly peaceful. Then in 2013, a new group of protesters, pro-life protesters, arrived who had a completely different approach than Gerald. She prefers the quiet, personal, one-on-one communication with people. She thinks that's more effective. Frankly, I do too.
Right.
Which is not to say that these other people don't have their own First Amendment rights. But the city was claiming, and the clinic was claiming, that they were doing illegal things. Englewood's response was to pass a buffer zone, which excludes from the vicinity of the clinic not only those people who they may or may not have a right to exclude, but also our client and other quiet, peaceful sidewalk counselors. Well, the Supreme Court in 2014, 9-0. How often do you get a unanimous decision in an abortion case? Maybe never, including people like RBG said, cities, you can't do that. These kind of buffer zones are disfavored. If you exhaust everything else, targeted injunctions against the actual wrongdoers, face-type laws, prosecutions of actual criminal violations, if none of that works, then maybe you can go to a buffer zone. Englewood did none of that, and that's been the testimony for the 7 years we've been litigating this case. It finally came out in court last week, and we're hoping we get a successful result in the end.
And this is at a time when we've got the biggest abortion case since Roe versus Wade is at the U.S. Supreme Court waiting for the opinion. I mean, it came up in the State of the Union address by President Biden. The Supreme Court justices, they showed their faces, which were stoic most of the time during the State of the Union, maybe even more stoic when he made that attack on them, because ultimately that's what he's trying to do, is even at that moment trying to influence them at the last minute. Really. And so we have that. But we also are representing South Dakota and their governor, Kristi Noem, in a case there involving informed consent.
Right.
So we are, I think, on the one hand, doing the traditional cases we've been working on, like the sidewalk counselor, like informed consent. But we're also preparing for what would a post-Dobbs, in a good way, world look like. And Frank, there would be an unbelievable amount of new litigation because you've got state constitutional issues. You have probably about half the states in the country that would want to put in similar laws, other states that might be kind of somewhere in the middle, and then some states that are going to be very pro-abortion.
If Dobbs goes the way we hope it goes, or even part of the way that we think it should go, it's not going to be an end of litigation. It's just going to be the beginning of a new round of litigation, slightly different in some ways. But you're right. I mean, this patchwork quilt of laws will be challenged and defended all across the country after that.
If Dobbs goes the way we think it does, in that particular case at the Supreme Court, we filed a major brief on that, amicus brief. And we've been involved in abortion litigation cases at the Supreme Court for, like I said, 4 decades. I think the crisis pregnancy centers, the women's health centers, are going to be really at risk in states that are pro-abortion. They're going to. We already know even though we've won at the Supreme Court on this, they are going to try to regulate them out of existence.
Let's not forget who was the defendant in the case that we brought to the Supreme Court. It was somebody named Kamala Harris, I believe.
Right.
She's in an even more influential position now. So that's the kind of thing we're up against. And you're right, crisis pregnancy centers are also on the front line, just as the sidewalk counselors are. They are targets of pro-abortion regulators all over the place.
So you got to get up to speed and ready to go for this battle. The abortion industry, they're ramping up. They're preparing like they've lost. We have to prepare like they are going to lose at the federal level. So what's going to happen when this really returns to the states for the first time since Roe versus Wade?
We have to be well-informed and engaged on what is going on with this fight and how things are going to change. And look, that is not something that we at the ACLJ are not already considering. We're already looking towards what happens depending on the decision. Decision can go either way. But what happens and how does this fight continue on? Like you said, they're not going away quietly.
The fight will be far from over if we get the decision that many people are predicting that opens the floodgates to allow states to regulate abortion more directly. And I think, again, folks, we have not seen a case like this since Roe versus Wade.